All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, whatever weird time noon is. How are you doing today?
Just woke up a little bit ago. I'm hanging in there, and I'm actually really glad to be here for this interview.
Good. All right. For those of you joining us right now, this is Santos. He's going by Monoverse right now, and you're in New Jersey. You said, right?
Yeah, I live in New Jersey, right outside of the Big Apple, New York City.
Cool. Okay, so how do you feel like New York has played into you starting working on music and becoming a producer and getting your tracks signed?
Oh, it's definitely really been a big influence, mostly because I started going out as soon as I could to clubs and stuff, and ended up meeting a lot of guys involved in producing and DJing in the area. So it's really been really influential on my music just being in the area.
Very cool. And you were able to like network early on then?
Yeah, actually, one of the first people I met, you might know as Echo.
Oh,
and
yeah.
When he was first getting signed to like Armada and he had his releases on like Spinnin' and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I had met him at this place called Love in New York where he was playing, and ever since then we've been in touch, and he supports me on my work, and it's really
wow.
cool just
That's awesome.
knowing him for years. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's small world, man. That's cool. Okay, so I first found out about you through Reddit when you were working heavily with Adastra, which is a three-man production trio, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Adastra is actually one person, well, one from New Jersey, me, one from Canada, and one from Florida. So,
Oh wow.
purely a internet collaboration project.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it was really interesting working with two other people, but I learned a lot from it, so worth doing.
So it was all Dropbox, yeah?
Yeah, everything we did was we would just project files, upload them to Dropbox, and send it off to the other guys and work kind of back and forth. And we'd use like Skype and screen sharing and stuff like that. But a majority of the work got done like just passing the project files back and forth.
What do you feel like are some major pros and cons of that?
I think with having two other people on a project, it's just like there's a lot of issues with getting stuff done and having everybody be happy. I think you have to have a certain mindset when you're working with other people where anything goes, and like you have to be able to accept that when you send off a project, it's going to come back to you and be like something completely different.
Sure.
Working with just one person, that happens, but when it happens with it's like double the effort with two people, and you can learn a lot from it, but you definitely have to be open-minded and be able to work well with others,
Sure. Have you worked with anybody like in the studio, like collaborated in person at all?
Yeah, actually, one of the guys from Adastra ended up coming up to New York one weekend. We ended up going and recording a vocal in this studio called Sweet Sounds, where my friend actually currently works full time there.
Oh, wow.
James Gill. So if you ever need studio time in the city, doing a short little plug for them. If you're ever in New York and need studio time, go to Sweet Sounds, ask for James Gill. He'll hook you up. Tell him I sent you. And yeah, that was the first time I was ever in a real studio, and it was the first time it was a little awkward because I'm used to sitting in my bedroom and working on music, and there's no judgment, there's no one else is watching you.
Sure.
So when we first got there, it was like, wow, this is really different. And we ended up doing 2 sessions there. The first one was a little awkward, and then the second time we came in, we had a better idea of what we were doing, and it was so fun, and it's definitely an experience I'll always remember.
Cool, good. And do you feel like there's pros and cons of working like with in person and then over like Dropbox, or there's some good things and some bad things that you feel like are really can benefit from choosing between those two options, if they are options, right?
Yeah. Definitely pros and cons to both. With Dropbox, like I said, you have like the infinite freedom of just like working in your bedroom and being able to create without anyone really watching you. But at the same time, working in person, if you two or however many people the project is, if you really have like chemistry, it goes down so much faster. You're able to bang out ideas, and you're able to actually like combine. Whereas, when you're collaborating on Dropbox and project files and stuff like that, it's just like you're not actually combining the workflow. You're just kind of overwriting and adding and editing stuff that's already done. But in person, you're really collaborating, so it's a little bit different. And there's pros and cons to both. Like in person, if you're not used to it, it is weird. Like I said, working with someone in person versus online. But once you get used to it, it's really fun.
Cool. And you're no longer working. I mean, you're not. You haven't. Adastro hasn't disbanded, right? But you're no longer necessarily gunning for heavy trance releases under that name.
Yeah. Right? We went through a lot of like personal life stuff. I was doing school and work full time, and one of the guys ended up moving and had a bit of trouble setting up his music setup down there. So we ended up taking a hiatus, and when he messaged me, we kind of decided that we were going to go and just kind of we'll continue to make music, but we're not going to pigeonhole ourselves to strictly like club music, strictly trance, because we kind of got lost along the way, like just trying to pigeonhole ourselves to get further in the trance scene, whereas we should have just been creating whatever the hell we wanted.
Right. And do you feel like that the expectation to make something, do you feel like that hinders the creative process for you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things that comes to mind is like my first couple project files where, there's no restriction when you first start making music, especially if you don't have music background. You're not trying to songwrite. You're just making cool sounds and, you're coming up with all this crazy stuff. And that kind of doesn't happen, naturally anymore, because now, I have it in my mind, I have to, make it for people to play it on their club radio shows and stuff like that. So when that happens, you're kind of losing that initial creativity where, you're kind of restricted to that. Oh, I need to make a bang bass line. It needs to be so loud that Armin's just going to crap his pants when he hears it. So, yeah, it's very limiting. And I'm trying to go... Not only am I trying to teach myself the songwriting aspect, I'm also trying to teach myself to be like open and creative again, because you kind of lose that along the way.
Sure. So now that you're no longer currently with Adastra, or at least there's no current projects, right? You're working as a solo act as Monoverse, correct?
Yep. Okay. And that's again progressive trance, so not much difference there, but it's just me, not two other people.
Sure. And you've got releases on Alter Ego and Discover and Infrasonic, correct?
Yeah. Cool. And I'm currently still working with them. Recover World I haven't heard from, but Alter Ego and Infrasonic, I have another EP on Infrasonic coming up, a remix for them, and I think some work for Alter Ego as well. So
awesome.
Really looking forward to those releases.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on those, man.
Thanks. Means a lot to me.
So in as far as working on Monoverse projects, has your workflow changed at all? I mean, obviously you don't have to drag and drop your files into Dropbox, but do you feel like your creative process for coming up with ideas or inspirations has changed at all?
Yeah, like I'm not so worried about like writing for the sake of collaboration. When I start an idea, it's really just me. But when you're working with two other people, it's you start a project knowing that it's going to go off to other people, so your creative workflow is a little bit different.
Sure.
So when I start a track now, it's more linear, the creative process, whereas like I'll be able to start and write a project, and I'll usually have the idea down in like a day, and it's just a lot more. I don't want to say it's better, because it's not necessarily better, but I do feel that the workflow is not as restricted working on the solo stuff.
Okay. Well, can we do this real quick? Can you just walk me through and talk me through maybe some of the creative process you go through, like just beginning to end, maybe how you start a track, and then maybe delve into some of the nitty-gritty of some of the decisions that you'd make. Okay.
Sounds good. Well, I used to be one of those guys who did let's start with the drums and the bass line because that's the most important. And I kind of dropped that along the way because I realized the projects I was starting like that, I wasn't finishing.
Okay.
So now when I start a project, I generally, I'm not so much the guy for hooks. I'm not really great on lead melodies. So when I start a project, it's usually chords.
Okay.
I actually do most of my writing with Ableton's grand piano in the simpler. It's just like
I do that as well, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so you use Ableton and you open up your grand piano and you just start with chords.
Yeah, I start with chords, and then I'll try to get a general idea for the style and the sound design that I want to go, because everything I start, I mean, I have a general progressive trance feel to it, but there's some days I'll be like, oh, I want like a really big Anjuna sound, or the other days I'm like, well, I want something more kind of like rolly trance, grooving trance. But so it starts with the piano always.
Okay.
And then I move into designing the breakdown. As soon as I have the chords, I'm in the breakdown, trying to get into the build up pretty much.
Okay, so you kind of start with your focus being at the break of the track.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason I do it is because I feel like you have the most creativity in the breakdown when you're doing like a climax, or you're doing the intro to your bass and your drums.
Yeah.
You already have like this set kind of perspective on the track, but once you get into the breakdown, everything opens up, and actually this kind of comes to mind. I saw Thomas Dot posted on Facebook the other day. He's like, I love doing the breakdown because I can make stuff sound pretty. And it's so true, because like when you finally make it into that breakdown of your trance track, it's just like everything opens up. Everything's a possibility. So I always start there. Always.
Okay, so on your sound design, let's get into some of the technical stuff. What are your VSTs that you're using, and how do you, is there a way in which you sort of, the things you're listening for when you're doing sound design, is there a way that you imagine the sounds? How do you work?
I'm not gonna try and impress you with anything. I have the pretty standard trance VSTs going on, like silence, massive, and stuff like that. I am getting a bit into like granular synthesis when I have the time to dick around. But I'm really looking for atmosphere. A lot of what really gets me going for like progressive trance stuff is like soundscapes, and so I do a lot of like resampling of stuff.
Okay.
So I'll bounce stuff down, apply a lot of like reverb and stuff like that, and try and make things kind of get more depth that way, because in the end, like I'll keep the MIDIs, especially since I'm writing with the piano. Mm-hmm. What I'll do is I'll copy and paste that onto a pads track, and I'll start with the pads, and then I'll try and make like soundscapes out of just like applying random effects here and there. Like phasers are great, and reverbs and delays, and you're able to just like, since you already have the MIDIs, you don't have to worry about like redesigning any of this. You can always just throw the MIDIs onto a new channel and make something new. So
okay.
I'm doing a lot of bouncing to audio and what I'll do is I'll have everything filtered up, like there's no filters applied, and then I'll bounce the audio, and that way I have the pure audio there, and you're able to apply filters and stuff like that later on. You can just it makes the workflow faster when you're just going and bouncing audio, because you don't have to worry about it. Well, not so much that you don't have to worry about it, but it makes it more set along the way. I think that improves your workflow too.
You're limiting what you can change as you go.
Right. Yeah. You can't go back and be like, oh, I need to add more layers to this pad patch or whatever, because it's already done.
Sure.
You could open up a new pad patch, but that one is set. So that's been really a big improvement in my workflow. A lot of audio now.
Okay, so walk me through those pads then. How many layers do you have? Are you layering them? Is there like a lot of EQ, just very minimal? Like how does that go?
In the breakdown, no, not a lot of EQ. And I think over time I've become a lot more minimal in my EQing just in general, just because I prefer to have the life of a sound there. Whereas when you get really surgical with EQ, you can really ruin fundamental harmonics so fast.
Sure.
Like if you're it's the difference of a couple hertz really, like where you're either gonna be represented in the full image, like everything gets represented well, or like it just kind of falls off a little bit. So
Sure.
I think over time I've become a lot more minimal in that. And as far as layering goes, I mean, my projects in the end don't end up being that heavy, like in terms of layers, but along the way of creating the sounds, like one layer might be actually like 8, because what I'll do is I'll group them in Ableton's instrument rack. So I'll have the pads, and it just says pads on that one channel, but it's actually like anywhere from like 1 to 6 or 10 or something like that. So my projects, they look minimal, but along the way there's a lot of layering and stuff like that.
Okay, so you sort of compartmentalize your pieces as you're working, limiting your options.
Yeah, and it's kind of important to do that, because like if you, and not so much that it's important to what am I trying to say? I mean, layering is a tricky topic, because if you don't really, it took me a while to figure it out, like to piece together a full sound. There's a bunch of individual sounds and a lot of stuff that you can do to make everything come together well, but
Sure.
you can still get away with making like one pad patch and making it sound big. But I think a lot of people, when they think about layering, is, oh, it needs to be like complex or something, and a lot of people think, oh, it needs to be like 8 layers for my bass line, and and lots of EQ and compression and all this stuff, and it really doesn't. The what I do have to say though is that if you're organized when you layer stuff and group things in your instrument rack or whatever program you're using, you bust things together, it makes things in the end make more sense, because it's so easy to get lost in your project files. And once you start getting up to like 70 tracks and stuff like that, it's like, one day I'll be working on something, and then the next, if I haven't organized it properly, it's like you wake up the next day and you're like, oh God, what have I done?
Sure. Okay, so let's say you've got your pads, you've got you've layered your pads together. How do you work out of that? How is there a technique or something that you feel that you use repeatedly to sort of gel your pads into your build, and then
well, when I think of gel, I think that's more of like a signal processing sort of thing, and I do use like a lot of compression, and I'll plug even my favorite compressor. I use Cytomic's The Glue, now built into Ableton 9, almost exclusively. It's like the best compressor ever. I'm in love with it. I use it for everything: drums, pads, leads, everything.
So you just use now the Glue compressor that's in Ableton 9?
Yeah, cool. And after that, my signal chain usually looks around like EQ first, and that's just like minimal cuts, and then compression. From there, I do usually some kind of like stereo imaging before I apply reverb and delay and stuff like that. And I think the order of which you process things really affects your end sound, because if you're compressing after an EQ, like, it's going to sound different than if you compress before an EQ, So,
and you have to really do you find yourself sort of going back and forth, like figuring out which one sounds better?
Absolutely. I'm always switching around stuff in my signal chain, and it's important to do that because you never know how one is going to affect the next or the rest of them.
Sure.
So you definitely have to experiment a lot, because different sounds do sound a lot different based on like how you're affecting the transients. Like say I do a lot of like I end up keeping usually the piano chords in my track, but I'll apply a lot of like compression and reverb and delay, and to make it kind of stand out in the mix, I find I usually do like a compressor after an EQ, then reverb and delay, and then another compressor, usually to bring out the transients, because once you drench it in reverb and stuff, you kind of lose that initial attack.
I see.
So I always end up boosting transients in the end, almost for a lot of the instruments I have.
So do you like bus all your pads together and then put a reverb on that bus, or do you have a reverb bus that you just send everything to?
Both, actually. Okay. That's a really good question. I find myself using a lot more of both insert and send, and even multiple room reverbs and stuff like that, because if you do it, it sounds on paper like it's a lot, because I know when you first start getting into like applying reverb and stuff like that, it's really easy to make stuff sound like really distant and really drenched in the reverb. But if you do it carefully, you can get a really cool sound mixing reverbs.
Okay. So how do you mix them then? Do you mean mix them like you have a different reverb on your pads than you do on like your reverb bus?
Yeah. Okay. I actually right now I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb, Valhalla Room, and this free VST Epic Verb.
Okay.
So my pads will usually I'll usually have Epic Verb on the insert for the bus, and that'll be like probably like 20 to 25% wet, and it just kind of gives it this like really nice space. But then I'll have Valhalla Vintage Verb on the send, and that'll be like EQ'd below probably like 300 hertz, and then above 10K.
Okay.
And I'll also probably sidechain that as well. So I find that the Valhalla room in comparison to Epic Verb is a little bit more tinny.
Okay.
So it works kind of for the trance kind of stuff, like the trance pumping big room.
Yeah.
So I find that I like to sidechain that one a lot, and you get a really nice kind of like swooping, pumping reverb sound on the tail.
Cool.
So yeah, multiple reverbs can be really cool. Just have to be careful and make sure not to make stuff too far back in the mix, you know?
Okay, cool. So you've got your elements, you're layering things together. How do you just finish the track? Is there like a key that you feel like you
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say that finishing a track usually for me comes down to arranging it right from the start. Because if I don't do that, I find I get lost in doing little nuances and stuff in like 16-bar loops.
Sure.
But if I'm just I'll just sit there and I'll literally just copy paste the pattern, and then I'll go and I'll make an extended chord progression and add melodies from there.
Is that something that you do from your like Ableton Grand Piano MIDI, or is that something that you do from after completing like your whole breakdown?
Usually after I do sound design, like initial sound design, then I'll arrange, because I've done it before where I do the MIDI first, but what ends up happening is that I lose the general. I'll lose the general sound design idea of the track, so it kind of gets lost along the way if I start arranging right from the start. So yeah, right after sound design, I'll usually go into arranging, and it helps because once you have the sound, a little bit of the sound design there, and you have the arrangement, it's like you already know what the finished sound is going to sound like. You already have the idea, and then you just have to work towards filling in the gaps once you have the whole piece there.
Okay, sure. Now, how long have you been doing this?
I think around 3 years now. It's a little bit more.
Okay. And what do you feel? Do you feel like there was something that you learned, or a technique that you started using that you feel like somewhere along the way just like boosted your sound exponentially as far as quality goes?
Well, there's probably a couple things that play into that. Well, as far as getting stuff done, I would say like really always finish your project files. That was the most important thing for me to learn. Because exponentially, like every project you finish, you become exponentially more creative and and you become better with your DAW even, so you become a faster producer. But other than that, like things that played into my sound, let's see. I'm gonna have to say having a good setup, like a good reference setup, was probably the most important thing for me, because once you're able to actually hear what other tracks sound like on something that plays it back flat and as it is naturally, you're able to actually hear what's wrong with your tracks by referencing others. So that's really important.
Cool.
And then as far as production techniques go that play into my sound, really learning to use a compressor, or like any kind of like dynamics shaping plugin. Really learning those is really important, because you can do so much with, like I said, audio before, but you can actually shape audio using compressors and stuff like that. And once you actually know what you're doing, it's so much easier to get stuff sounding right in the mix, because you're able to actually envision and hear what you need to do.
Okay, cool. So how many hours would you say that you spend every week working on music?
Right now, I'm actually, and that's kind of a long story where I am right now, but I'm doing a lot. I'd say like probably like at least 3 hours a day producing. And when I was working and going to school full time, I was only able to put in like an hour a day or something. But what ended up happening was I was sacrificing sleep for producing, and I ended up getting and this is a lesson to be learned for anyone who's doing the same thing. When you're doing too much, it's really bad for you. I actually ended up coming down with mono, and now I know Monoverse. I actually have like adrenal fatigue now because I just wasn't sleeping, and I was doing so much. I had work, I had school, I had my girlfriend, and I had music full time, and I was throwing parties in New York, and I was doing way too much, bit off way too much that I could chew, and it wears you down after a while. So always have a healthy balance.
Okay, good to know, and I wish you a swift recovery on that.
Thanks, man.
Or at least as swift as it can be, right?
I know, yeah. It's kind of a pain in the ass, but I won't bore you with my complaints.
Okay, so a lot of I've read like interviews with like Mark Sherry and stuff, and he'll say stuff like, if you're not spending 8 to 10 hours, you're not going to catch up. So would you disagree with that then? I mean, it sounds like maybe initially you need to do that, but it sounds like right now, you're still pumping out quality stuff, and you're not necessarily doing this full time.
Yeah, I think to some extent, I think that's just a general guideline. And in the end, the total amount of hours is what shapes you to be the producer that you are, or whatever you're doing. Anything creative, anything that involves getting stuff done, really. However many hours you put in ultimately totals up to the finished project, the finished song, the next one that you do. But it's not realistic for all of us to put in 8 hours a day. Sure, Mark Sherry makes a living, touring and doing mastering, and he does great masters, by the way. Okay. If you guys ever need a mastering service, but it's a little true. There are guys, I'm not going to name drop any guys on Alter Ego who kind of blew up after doing a remix on Alter Ego and then got picked up by Marcus Schultz and all these guys. I won't drop any names, but if anyone's familiar with them, if they're listening, they might know. But there's just certain people who can put in that time, and they do progress faster generally. But there are also people who... it comes down to natural talent, really. There are people who put in 2 hours a week and make better productions than I do. And it's hard to say. It's hard to say that me, if I put in 16 hours a day, if I'm really gonna get that much better,
Fair enough.
And on a last note with that, it really comes down to how productive you are during those 2 hours. There are people. I know this one guy on Enhanced, his alias is AWD. He's new to their record label, and he's crunched for time all the time. He only produces like on the weekends, really. So he'll message me, and I'm never around on the weekends, so I can't even work with him. And he'll message me and be like, "Yo, listen to this. I got like 2 hours before I need to finish it." And he'll send me that clip, and then 2 hours later, he'll have the finished track. And it's like, it really comes down to how productive you are in that time. Because I could spend 8 hours a day and get nothing done. I could be Facebooking the whole time while I'm producing, and it's just not productive. But if you're sitting there and banging it out in 2 hours, it's way more beneficial.
Fair enough. Okay. So if people like your music, what can they do? How can they support you? What's the best way that they can go about it?
Well, I'm not going to badger people to buy my music because I know it's not realistic. I think the most important thing is to do stuff like sharing on their social networks like Facebook and Twitter, and just make sure you get the right accounts, because I know mine is at Monoverse Music on Twitter, and I'll search Twitter and a lot of people are tweeting at Monoverse, and that guy has to be so upset right now because I know he's got nothing to do with music and he's getting all these tweets. But yeah, doing that, and moreover, if you're really serious about someone, request for them to be playing in your area, because you never know when, someone's going to go on vacation or is going to go travel somewhere and might put their name in the hat and send a promoter an email and be like, "Hey, I'm in your area. You don't have to pay for flights. Let me play at your club."
Sure.
And if they recognize it from a lot of people requesting it, it's going to happen, So
yeah, very cool.
That, I say, if you really want to support someone's music, request them with your local promoters.
Okay. Cool. Let's say somebody did want to buy your music. I mean, is Beatport your best bet or what?
Uh, I'm not gonna bitch about Beatport. I won't. I swear. I would say probably iTunes
Okay.
or Audio Jelly or Track It Down or anywhere that's not Beatport, because they make you pay $2 and then they take a lot of that and then the label takes that, and yeah, it's better if you pay the $1 on iTunes and then I split that with the record label.
Fair enough. Fair
it's
enough.
not
Okay.
so bad.
Okay, cool. All right, so to close, what would you tell a producer who just today was like, all right, I'm serious, or what would you tell yourself the day that you started to take this seriously?
Well, like I said before, I think the most important thing for me over time was finishing stuff and not just making loops and nonsense projects. Definitely finish the most important things that you start. Obviously not everything. Some ideas aren't worth finishing, but when you have something decent, finish it no matter what. And I think if I had to go back in time, I would probably tell myself to pick up an instrument, because I'm finding that the ability to improv and to create is really dependent on maybe not so much playing an instrument, but having that musicality behind you. So I think it's important to kind of integrate that no matter what. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of people say music theory is restricting on creativity, but I don't think that's true. I think it helps. So yeah, I would tell myself pick up an instrument.
Cool. Good stuff. All right. Well, this has been a really wonderful debut broadcast for Recompressed. Thank you so much for coming on. And
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Good luck with everything. Have a good recovery,
Yeah.
and I hope you continue to release some awesome stuff. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, man.
All right.